So 5 states going live with privacy laws, January actually, and I just wanted to do a quick round on those. So firstly, Delaware, it looks like it's a little broader. It includes not-for-profits, includes education, as most companies.
It does. Colorado, of course, already includes nonprofits, but I think as you get more states that add to some of those unique factors, we do see a trend in it overall. I think heightens awareness there. Delaware also on under 18s. So what is a child? And the fact that you need an opt-in, for example, when you're doing targeted advertising to children. If children are under 18 as opposed to under 16 or under 13, the COPPA standard, and you think about your website's demographic, that may actually trigger some additional material requirements on when do you collect opt-in and who's your audience. So I think Delaware, we have some of the other states on the list coming online in 2025, but I think it starts really teeing up that age-appropriate design code act type questions for a lot more companies.
Gotcha, thanks. And then Iowa next, pretty narrow, would you say?
I think about this as the under or the over, because most of companies that I talk with, what they're really interested in is, do I need to add more things to my privacy portal? Do I need to add more things to my privacy policy or how I handle data subject access requests? If Iowa doesn't provide for certain rights, like the right to correction, okay, so maybe residents of that state may or may not just get the benefit of that right anyway. But if you have scenarios where states add a new right that the others have not yet done, you both need to notify consumers about that right in your privacy policy, but also on that privacy rights portal that you have. And so on that front, the other one, Minnesota, comes online next summer and has that right to request a list of third parties, which Oregon already has that right in place. And I will just flag, Oregon is enforcing that issue. And they said they would do it, and they are doing it. So maybe just a little housekeeping, take a look at your DSAR portal. Does it talk about the right to request a list of third parties? And if not, maybe this would be a good time to, as you're making these other updates, to make some of these updates as well for existing laws.
Gotcha. What we're seeing globally, with rights especially, is once you have it for one state, that full set, you're doing it across the country. You're not trying to have a separate portal for Iowa that doesn't have a correction right, as an example. But Oregon and Minnesota, a little more tricky, right? Because they're add-ons.
They're add-ons, and it means putting together that list. A lot of companies have confusion of who goes on the list. The law in Oregon was written you had to really parse the language, and it's a list of third parties. So if you think about your California, your sales, your shares, who's the recipient of those lists, that's your third parties, and having a list of that you would maintain and refresh and update and provide if consumers ask for it in Oregon, and then soon in Minnesota. I will say that is one, just because there's some sensitive, one might argue even slightly proprietary information there. That may be an area where companies don't necessarily give that out across the country.
I think we talked about this on another huddle. It's not which third-party vendors have you shared a particular individual's data with. It's here's who we share with generally. Is that right? And
it's not your service providers. So it's those to whom you are quote unquote selling or sharing. So it is your digital advertising tech stack. So think about it that way. But let's just say put your hat on as, yes, you're a consumer, but you also have competitors and you do privacy rights requests and you happen to be an Oregonian resident, or you find an Oregonian resident. I think it's a good way to see, to the extent that you couldn't already tell from like a cookie scan, who are their third-party partners, particularly including via API. So I can see the privacy consumer rights perspective, but I can also see the competitive ferreting out information angle as well.
Oh yeah. Nebraska next. There's no minimum, right? There's no minimum number of Nebraska residents that you hit. Is that
right? So your small businesses in Nebraska, you're going to be thinking about this anyway. I will just say, from my experience with a lot of startups, yes, they're paying attention to the minimums, but as you prepare a company, it's usually easier to build your privacy house in order from the beginning than try to retrofit it later on. So I think the minimums, yes, they matter, but at the end of the day, they're probably things you need to be thinking about already, just for valuation.
Especially if you're growing, right? Of course, yeah.
Especially if you're growing.
Next was New Hampshire. I didn't see anything there that interesting, except for the one of the GPC, Global Privacy Control States. Yeah.
Right. And so maybe we might talk about that. There weren't that many states to date that had this affirmative requirement to honor global privacy control signals. We now have I would say a good extra handful of states that come online next year that also have this requirement, New Hampshire being one of them. But that state, there are still companies who don't have GPC enabled yet. And so it's another reminder that this is already a requirement in some states and now more states. So housekeeping, if you don't have it yet in place, it's a good time to ask and make those changes.
Gotcha. That's all January 1st, but the New Jersey, a little more civilized. They're giving us till January 15th in case you're like leaving it till the last minute. You don't have to do it over New Year's. But what's interesting, they're really short processing period for opt-outs, right? It's 15 days rather than the 30 and 45s we've been seeing.
It's short, but I'm going to go back to being as a very practical matter. Think about California. Yes, you had some time to do it, but you had to account for all of the sales that happened during the interim period. So I think particularly in the at least web space, you wanted to be able to honor opt-outs as soon as you can anyway. So yes, but companies really are trying to make that happen and occur as quickly as possible. The other thing I might flag for New Jersey is one, as I think about different states that on the consumer protection front tend to be fairly active on enforcement, New Jersey is one of those I would put in that category. They also have rulemaking. So to date, we have California and we have Colorado who have been doing rulemaking, which meant that the requirements and the details of those requirements continue to expand and something that your program had to really grow with. And now New Jersey will be added to that list.
So, and actually, does this put pressure on New York to come up with something? Because I mean, New Jersey basically at some point now to proxy New York law, right? I mean, you got New Jersey, you got Connecticut, you got two of the tri-states.
There's a little bit of bragging rights in the Northeast. You know, you've got Connecticut, you've got Virginia and our Maryland. Yeah, I would say there's bragging, peer pressure rights for New York to get something online, not out of the question.
So they're the January states. What else is going on for the rest of the year that we should keep an eye on?
Well, Maryland, I think, is a really important one because we've been talking about Maryland for quite some time. They've got that affirmative data minimization. They've got some outright bans on sales of information. So we saw, for example, with Washington, My Health, My Data, that really stopped companies from doing digital advertising in the state. And New Jersey is a really important state. It's really populous. You've got people coming in and out of New Jersey in terms of just regular work and daily patterns. How does industry react to Maryland's requirements? How do they get interpreted and applied with sensitive data, which is, again, a pretty broad category that keeps getting broader with all of these laws? So I think it is a state just to see, if anything, more of the reaction as some of the requirements come online.
Gotcha. Well, Lisa, thanks for keeping us up to date.
Never a dull moment in this space. Absolutely. Good to see you.